Hi everybody, this is Gregor from PreSonus, and if you're interested in podcasting, I'd like to know if you have checked out Studio One 5 Prime yet. It comes with a podcast template, also like Studio One 5 Artist and Professional, but it's free and it makes recording and editing a podcast as easy as it can be. And what excites me so much about this is that it doesn't imply that it's bad or that you have to make any compromises on quality. We spent a lot of time to basically pre-configure a couple of very nifty little mixing tricks to make your voice sound great right from the get-go without you having to adjust anything except maybe the volume. To me, this is probably the most beginner-friendly template that we've ever created. And in that spirit, I also want to approach this episode today, where we're going to talk start to finish about every component that you need aside from your computer to get going with your very first podcast episode. We're going to talk about how to activate and download Studio One. We're going to talk about some product recommendations. We're going to talk about how to set them up, how to connect everything. We ain't going to leave any stone unturned here. And because I know that podcast folks don't mind longer videos, I mean, listening to people talk for hours is kind of their jam. Let's start at the very beginning and think about all the different equipment parts that we need. It's not that many. So in chronological order, I direct all of my wit and humor towards this microphone, which has like a diaphragm, a membrane that vibrates due to the sound waves that I'm sending in this direction. That generates an electrical current that's being sent through a cable towards the computer. So I need myself, a mic, an XLR cable. So far so good, right? But here's where things get a bit more abstract. Right now we're dealing with real world analog things we can touch, feel. But now we have to enter the world of a computer, which is digital, simulated, virtual. So that thing that's happening in the real world kind of has to be converted into the digital world now. And that's where audio interfaces come in. They essentially translate those real-world signals that we send into them into something the computer can understand, and vice versa. The processed sound gets translated by the audio interface and sent back to the speakers. So to summarize, we need ourselves, we need a microphone, we need an XLR cable, we need an audio interface, we need a USB cable or a connector from the audio interface to the computer, we need Studio One 5 Prime, and we need the headphones or speakers so we can actually listen to our processing we do in the software. Great, so now that we have a basic understanding of the kind of equipment that we need and also why we need it in the first place, we can go shopping. So let's look for some budget-friendly options. And fortunately, there is one that reigns supreme above all else for me. It's kind of like the reigning king of bang-for-buck country, and that is the AudioBox USB Studio Bundle. The AudioBox bundle is simply incredible because all of the equipment that I listed earlier and explained to you why we need it is included in this bundle already. So for $249 SRP, you can get everything that you need to get your podcast going. And this would be enough to sustain you throughout your entire podcast career. I think there's no better deal than that, especially if you consider the fact that Studio One Artist is also included, the bigger brother of Studio One Prime, which also comes with some very handy features for podcasters, such as Strip Silence, which lets you basically tidy up the entire audio of your podcast with one click. For the 25-year anniversary of PreSonus, there's also a Black Edition now. Check it out if you can get your hands on that one. I'd say go for it. Please note though that this tutorial will mainly focus on Studio One Prime as a free podcasting software. You can use that with any other microphone you have, or if you already have an audio interface. It's of course not just restricted to PreSonus stuff. But you will forgive me if I'm a little biased. If you have most of the things on the list already, but you're missing a couple of items, a microphone like the PX1 would be a great choice if you're still looking for one. Sounds absolutely incredible. Also, the Studio 2.4C or 2.6C with even better converters in sound could be an option for you. Or the AR8C mixer if you need more hands-on control and SD card recording. Alright, enough shopping for now. Let's look at how we can actually set up an interface so that we have a clean mic level that sounds professional. I'm showing this on a Studio 2.6C interface here, but the steps are not specific to it. You can follow along with any other interface you have. First, you connect your USB cable to your interface. You connect that to your computer. Then you take that XLR cable that we talked about, that microphone cable, and you plug that into your very first input. Please refer to the manual of your microphone to find out if you also need to feed it 48-volt phantom power. All of PreSonus interfaces are able to do that if required. Increase the gain on the input where you plugged your microphone in until you can see the signal LEDs light up when you speak into your microphone. You can see this very nicely on the Studio 26C, but if you only have like one LED for clipping, meaning that you're too loud, too distorted, then basically try to shout into your microphone and set the gain so that you just don't trigger that red LED to go off. Finally, on the back, simply connect your headphones or your speakers. Okay, fantastic. The gear situation is sorted. Let's look at Studio One Prime, how to install it and how to get started. To get Studio One Prime, all you need to do is go to my.presonus.com and create an account. Once your account has been created and you confirmed your email address, you'll be greeted with the homepage of your account on my.presonus.com. Now you can either scroll all the way down to try the full Studio One 5 professional demo for 30 days without any limitations, or you click on Go Shopping to get your own free perpetual version of Studio One Prime right away. If you're a beginner, I would recommend you to start with Studio One Prime so that you're not completely overburdened with the massive feature set that Studio One comes with. So when you click on Go Shopping, you're going to be taken straight to the PreSonus shop. From there, simply click on Software, Studio One, and Studio One Prime, the best free DAW. Add it to cart and proceed to checkout without any charges. Right after your purchase, you will see this pop up back on the home page, and you just click on Studio One 5 Prime to download. Simple as that. After downloading, you either run the setup if you're on Windows, or you drag the application to your applications folder if you're on Mac. Once the installation is completed, start Studio One, log in with the same credentials that you used for your account on my.presonus.com, and you're ready to roll. Don't worry about any of the additional content installations, you can get back to that at a later point. Alright, so after activating Studio One Prime, you open it up for the first time. This is what it looks like. And of course, Studio One is an incredibly deep software, which can be quite daunting in the beginning. But if you just stick to the included podcast template, you'd be surprised how easy it is to get going. I think you'll find your way around it incredibly quickly, probably faster than with any other software out there. So to start, one thing we need to take care of is actually selecting our audio interface that we set up previously. And to do that, all we need to do is click on the sound card / audio interface symbol here in the middle. Once we've done that, we can choose a new playback and recording device. This just means that this audio interface will be used to record our microphone and also play back what we just recorded through either our headphones or our speakers. At least on Mac, you can also set these separately, but for now, let's just put them both to the same audio interface. So I just click here, and then I just click on the Studio 26C in my case, or Audio Box or whatever you have. That's all we need to do here. So we click OK. And now we're pretty much ready to record our very first episodes. I am absolutely convinced that you can learn how to record and edit the podcast from knowing basically nothing about it to knowing everything you need to know in just a couple of minutes. All you need to learn is maybe a couple of basic key commands and you're ready to roll. So to start, click on New Song, even though your podcast is probably not a song. It's probably more about songwriting perhaps or other topics, but that's where you click. And then you click on Podcast Production. Everything's pretty much taken care of already. You don't have to tinker with any of these settings. Just choose an appropriate title for your podcast episode. You don't have to do this, of course. You can also change the name at any point. And then you just literally click on OK. Everything is pretty much set up. You don't have to change anything about this at all. You have a track at the top. And it also says in the description here that it's for your intro and outro, if your show has that, or sound effects that you want going on as you're talking. Then you have one track for your host, like microphone 1, and a second one in case you have a guest. All the tracks that you want to record in real time, you can just record arm by clicking on the respective button here. In my case, I'm just going for one microphone setup, so I just disable record on the guest. I really just hit record on the host. And before I get started, let me just drag and drop some music onto the first track. I can just do that from the Windows Explorer or Finder. Super easy to do. So I just have a little bit of music prepared here. Just drag that from the Finder directly into my show. And if I want to listen that back really quickly, it's as easy as hitting the spacebar. We're also going to talk a little bit about basic editing. So let's say that I want to, fade this in slowly and fade this out gradually at the end. It's really easy. You can just zoom in. If you want to zoom in on Studio One, you just go to the timeline and then you just use your mouse wheel or your trackpad, with a swipe. That's how you zoom in or out. You can also go sideways by holding down Shift and scrolling vertically, but you can also scroll horizontally like this if you want. And you'll notice these handles here, and you can just drag that out. And it's as easy as that to create a fade in like this. Of course, we can also do that at the end. So let's just go to the end really quickly. And we have the perfect fade out. And yeah, there's only one thing we need to take care of before we can hit the big red button down here and actually start recording our first episode. And that is to tell Studio One where we've actually plugged those microphones into. Because if you have an audio interface with several inputs, Studio One can't anticipate which one you actually use to connect your mic. So that's something that we weren't able to set up with this template in advance for you. That's something you have to tell Studio One yourself. But that's super easy. So you just click in the mixer where it says mic 1, and then you click once again on audio I/O setup. That just means input and output setup. Don't get too confused by that term. And yeah, it already opens up at the page where you have to be. You see we have one mic input prepared, one mic 2 input for the occasional guest that might be coming to the show. And we also have a stereo input. This is if you want to, record some music from your iPod or your iPhone or whatever Android device you have, MP3 player, that kind of thing. Just make sure that you actually have copyright clearance for that. In my case, I really just want to hook up one microphone. And then I would just use this matrix over here. So I have my mic in input 1. So all I need to do is just say mic, 1 on input 1. And that's pretty much all I have to do here. It's really super simple. Click on apply, hit OK, and hit the red button. And now we're pretty much ready to record our very first episode in this brand new podcast, The Silly Goose Time. And you stop with hitting the spacebar. If you want to play, it's hitting the spacebar. Super intuitive, just like you would expect. And now we're pretty much ready to record our very first episode in this brand new podcast. So that's already pretty cool. You can hear though that the voice has, quite a bit of a issue. It's struggling really to get through against the music. So we need to level this a little bit. Fortunately, that's super easy to do with this template also. Simply, lower the fader for the music like this and bring up the fader for your mic, and that should be a lot better already. And now we're pretty much ready to record our very first episode in this brand new podcast, The Silly Goose Time. Yeah, that's pretty much all you need to get started right there. Now, if you have recorded a couple more parts and you actually said something that you didn't mean to say or whatever, or you had like a trip of your time, which never happens to me, fortunately, then you can just do some very basic editing in Studio One. You don't have to go too much into the weeds, but some very handy commands I want to show you right now. So the first thing I would recommend you to do is to click up here in the toolbar on your arrow tool, and then select the split tool as your secondary tool. And now on a Mac, if you hold down Command, or on a Windows PC, if you hold down Control, you change your tool from this basic selection tool here to the split tool, and you can use that, to very easily cut parts like that, delete things you don't necessarily want anymore. And that's super handy indeed. What you can also toggle is the ripple edit. That's the button up here. What that does is that as soon as you delete a part like this, the part that comes afterwards is being put in place like this. And that can also save you a lot of extra steps. Another great thing about the ripple edit mode is that it lets you squeeze in additional sentences into a segment after the live recording. Let me show you. So let's say I'm recording another part here, just recording a little bit of extra footage so you can see what I mean. And let's just assume that I wanted to bring this all the way to here, in between these two parts. Right? And let me also adjust the track height a little bit so we can see that a bit more clearly. All I need to do is once again hold down Command on the Mac or Control on the Windows PC, make a cut, so this is the section that I actually want, and just move that in between these two. And now, because Ripple Edit is actually active, you see that it placed it right between them, which is just super handy. Pretty much ready. Just recording a little bit of extra footage so you can see. And if you run into the issue that this is not quite precise, just hover down your mouse between these two events, you know, where this one ends and this one starts. And you see that in the lower half, there will be this line with the two arrows facing outwards appearing. And that you can use to just very easily adjust, you know, the event boundaries. And that way you can prevent these nasty little clicks from happening as you're switching takes, because you don't want people to actually hear that. Pretty much ready. Just recording a little bit of extra footage, so that works really great. You can also hit X. This would be another very useful key command to have a little crossfade. So as I'm zooming in here, you see there's like this little crossfade that I can move around. Another thing that I would really advise you to do if you're working on your podcast is to click on the track options. It's this wrench icon up here, and you want to enable no overlap when editing events. What that does is if you're you know, moving something forward or backward and you move something onto an existing event that will be replaced, which makes it incredibly easy to, you know, just reposition stuff, because it saves you the hassle of also having to delete the events that are underneath. It will just be replaced immediately and automatically. You can also slit the content around of the waveform without actually moving the event container. That's also super useful. And yeah, that should be pretty much all the basic editing you need to get started with your podcast. And if you want to get really surgical, the last key command that I want to share with you is the tabulator key. As soon as you hit that, you always go to the beginning of the next transient, meaning like the next consonant in this case, or loud noise, which allows you to, you know, cut something very precisely and then putting something else on the same spot with, for example, cut and paste. Once you have the entire episode recorded, you just want to zoom out a bit and then move the end marker closer to your selection. Like that would be the length of your podcast now. And as soon as that's set, you can just go to Song up here, Export Mixdown, and then specify that you want to export between the start and end marker as your range. Give that a name, choose your appropriate format, and you're good to go to upload that to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whichever podcast provider you're wanting to upload to. Now, which format you should go for in the Export Mixdown menu really also depends on your target platform. Where do you want to release your podcast? Is it just offline and you give it away to a couple of friends and you're using a really high quality mic? Sure, then you can go for something like an uncompressed WAV file in 44.1 kilohertz. If you want to have some video to go with that, you probably want to go with 48 kilohertz sample rate. But if you go for something like Apple Podcast, then often the consensus is that 128 kilobit per second MP3 with 44.1 kilohertz sample rate is actually the way to go. And the idea behind it is just that if the platform receives a file already with the correct bitrate and sample rate, then it doesn't have to do as much of a compression to it anymore to make it fit their standards. Now, if you're talking about that topic, that is way too deep for such a basic tutorial. Nothing that you have to worry about with your first episodes. If you don't fiddle around too much with the mixer settings in Studio One's podcast template, you're gonna have a great sounding podcast without having to worry about all these things. Worry about the top 2% later down the line. People actually like and enjoy watching a content creator's setup get better over time. Trust me, I'm talking from experience. And it just makes you more human. So really focus on the content, make that good, and just leave the optimization of the last 2 to 3% to later down the line. One more thing I have to mention, of course, otherwise it wouldn't be a start to finish tutorial, is distribution strategies. How do you actually get your podcast to people? And there, I think it's definitely worth looking at some of the professional distribution services out there. They could really help you get some exposure. And a great way to find these is just do a quick search for podcast distribution service. And I'm sure you're going to find one that suits your budget and needs. Thank you so much for your attention. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. My friend Joe Gilder and I have new tutorials out every week. And happy podcasting.